The same naturalistic thinking is applied in the area of morality. If truth of mere appearances is not a sufficient basis for ordinary action, then it becomes hard to know how to act and behave in life, claims the naturalist. And so naturalist is losing his soul as he continuously faces two questions: what am I and what must I do? In other words, who am I? What is my one fixed, non-changing, certain nature with which I could identify with as my being and soul? And what must I do? How am I to choose between appearances? The answer given by the naturalist was, temporarily accept the appearances or inequalities for practical purposes while pursuing your long-term objective of elimination or simply wholesale destruction of all appearances, destruction of the world of inequalities or differences. The reasoning of the naturalist or the doubter is that if he can remove from his awareness the contrast between the hypothetical non-changing reality and the self-evident appearance or inequalities, then he would be left hopefully but arguably with peace, which is to say, with something which is non-changing, which is permanent, and that could be regarded as his default being and as his soul and peace. That so-called soul of the naturalist is in fact none other than the bottomlessness of the abyss of knowledge. It is nothingness, perdition, and horror. The pursuit of nothing is the naturalist's means to establish his soul. And the examples of the claims the naturalists are making about reality continue. If we went to the stars at the speed of light and returned in 10 years, we would be 10 years older, but everything on Earth would be 100 years old, claims the naturalist. True or false? That is false. Further telling us that we do not see the moon, since we do not see the sight of the moon, or the sun, since it takes time for light to travel to us, and as a result, we are not getting real-time images of the moon. Aside from the fact that sight does not travel from the moon into us, but rather from us towards the moon, let us look at the other error. The assumption the naturalist makes here is that the so-called travel of light has a status of ideology rather than of reality. Within naturalism, light is not reality, but ideology. Ask yourself, who possibly could be denying light the status of reality? The realist, the typical naturalist he is, responds by asserting that relativity theory is not a refutation of traditional physics, but its expansion. It necessitates thinking in counterintuitive ways about space and time, but that is no threat to the knowability of the world. The realists would be correct if it was true that either the anti-realist or the realist himself were in fact referring to space and time, or to the physical, and not rather to theories completed by other theories within their attempted ideology of naturalism. The truth is, Einstein's theory does not require us to think in counterintuitive ways about space and time, since the theory is not about space and time at all, but rather about attempted ideas and concepts of space and time within naturalism. In other words, yes, we do see the distant celestial bodies in actual real time. The same with Kurt Gödel theory. That is not a theory about reality. The realists believe that Gödel shows that mathematical truths cannot be identified with provability. That conclusion, however, could only be reached by the naturalist himself. The self-referentialist Gödel claims that there is a statement within formal mathematics that is true, but cannot be proven within mathematics. But here the naturalist realist is also wrong. He is wrong since that so-called mathematical statement within the mathematics is not located within the mathematics at all. That statement is not part of mathematics. It is a part or a member of an altogether different set. That statement belongs to the so-called hypothetical possibility, to the awareness in abstract, to the set zero, or as we simple folk call it, to nothing. Outside the ideology of naturalism, the so-called hypothetical true statement within mathematics cannot even be hypothetical, let alone be part of, or be within the formal mathematics itself. That is difficult for the naturalist to see, since naturalism is taking law and principles as reference to reality. so it is rather hard for him to estimate the difference between possibility and actuality. The so-called mathematical statement within the mathematics is located not within reality of mathematics, but within self-awareness of mathematics, not unlike all other mathematical statements within the ideology of naturalism, which the naturalists take for granted as their ontological reality. That certainly exists as reality. Mathematics is not partial or incomplete. It is immature to conclude otherwise. There is no statement in the language of the system that can be neither proved nor disproved in that system. There is no proposition undecidable in that system, as that is undecidable merely from the vantage point of what? A theory? Tell me more. There are no undecidable or unequal or mutating propositions, claims, or objects in reality. It is not true that the system or the mathematics, if consistent, is incomplete, since you are referring to a concept of that system and a concept of the mathematics, not to mathematics, and a concept of the mathematics, not to mathematics. Yes, you can formally specify the sum total of our mathematical knowledge, since specification does not require conceptualization in order to be formal. The mathematics is both complete and consistent, except within naturalism. Then, within naturalism, there's also this so-called quantum entanglement problem. Little did you know, but naturalism is here to inform you that particles are entangled in such a way that the state of each particle cannot be described independently of the others. Just like the Greeks told us that subject is entangled within the object, as if they were referring to either subject or object. This is what's described by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The particles are in superposition of non-locality, insofar as there could be such thing, that is, either particles are entangled or the naturalist has not drawn the lines between reality and awareness correctly. And how could it be otherwise for self-referentialists to do? The last man who could speak on the matter speaks the loudest, claiming that the outcome of one measurement influences the observed properties of other particles. Wrong. Those are not other particles just because you, the self-awareness, are aware of them or can postulate them. We are told that when particles are not observed, they are waves. So what are they really? What are photons, waves, or particles in reality? The answer is, the so-called unobserved particles or waves are precisely nothing. Their ontological status belongs to that of concepts, not reality. Your termination procedure should have a cutoff point at which you stop talking about reality and then start talking about awareness of awareness you mistake for reality. From whose point of view is the so-called unobserved particle a wave, may we ask? Whose point of view is it? The answer can only be, it is not a point of view, but a vantage point of a theory which is incomplete. Whose point of view? The view from nowhere, which is to say, from the vantage point external to reality, and that is sheer ideology, privilege, and pride as rebellion against God. So if particle is a wave merely from the vantage point of ideology, as opposed to reality, can it be said the particle really is a wave? The particle from the vantage point of nothing is nothing. 0 times 1 is 1, says the natural scientist. So, there is no entanglement because there is no duality or plurality to begin with. To attribute the wave and the particle the same status is a statement about the author of the attribution himself rather than about his delirious findings. Within the science outside of naturalism, we report only the particle, not the wave. The wave is not part of the equation, since references and reports of reality are not equations. We cannot be charged with excluding the wave from observations, since waves do not belong to observations, but to conceptions. Conceptions incomplete by other conceptions. That fact, naturalist is having a hard time seeing, since in his case, both the particle and the wave are conceptions, since he is the author of those observations, is himself a conception, a self-aware concept. Because naturalists are unable to distinguish between knowledge and reality, they are confused. They are not observing particles, but thinking about particles. We know this because we remember who the so-called naturalist observer is, namely not an observer at all, but its opposite, a sequence of incomplete ideas, a semi-theoretician, a self-doubting thinker, a self-referentialist, equating one set of incomplete ideas with another set of incomplete ideas. And from the vantage point of that incomplete, non-existent equation, the naturalist scientist then claims he is making claims about particles. So the answer is, there are no other particles or waves because you are not observing any particles. Thinking is not observing. There is no particle inequality. So to reiterate, the particles are not entangled. The reason the two particles are not entangled is because you are not referring to any two particles to begin with. And the reason you are not referring to two particles is because you, as a naturalist, cannot be referring to anything, let alone particles, or even to one particle. You are referring not to reality, not to particles, but to ideology, to the attempted ideas or concepts of particles. The reason naturalist is making this constant blunder is because to him reference is law or principle, and because of that he is unable to see that even his entangled particles do not have the same ontological status, and even within his own system, one of those ideas of particles is supposed to have the status of reality and the other of knowledge. The naturalist standard practice is to sweep under the rug the difference in status between his particles. Einstein argued in a similar naturalist way, namely, that space is entangled with time. It just could not be that one is above the other, time above space, or the particle of purpose over particle of no purpose. For time to be about or over space must be some kind of supremacy. So let us try to equate time and space in order to eliminate supremacy, as if equating reality with ideology could produce reference to time and space, rather than self-reference of idea of time with the idea of space. Einstein is not talking about space or time. What else had naturalism told us that was very scientific? Naturalism also told us that parallel lines are not parallel but actually meet. That is, they meet if and only if it is legitimate to include into reality the model of spherical space. However, that is legitimate only within naturalism itself. What if it is not legitimate to do so outside of the ideology of naturalism, where parallel lines never meet? The ideology of naturalism has no cutoff point delineating reality from awareness. From whose point of view do parallel lines meet? The naturalist can only answer from the point of view of theory. But why should we privilege the point of view of theory, which by definition is not a point of view, but its exact opposite, namely the point of concept, point of idea, and point of ideology? In other words, why should we privilege ideology over reality? Why should we privilege theory as reference, or law as the way? Is there not something illogical for naturalism to define parallel as perpendicular? And why the obsession with reductionism? That is because the ideology of naturalism is unable to recognize distinctions as reality and itself as ideology. The objective of naturalism was to create a meta-narrative that excludes God and functions as knowledge or substitutes soul or a being and reference to reality. This, naturalism told us, was to commence by reducing everything non-physical to physical with the hope that it can be shown that everything that exists, everything that can be measured is physical. Then a claim can be established that God is not real, and hence language about God outside of naturalism is not about reality. However, that argument only works if it is true that naturalism itself is a language and not just noise, self-delusion, self-deception, and self-reference. What is not a language? The answer, something which refers to itself. And what are the outcomes of naturalist thinking? Is it success or failure? Naturalism is notoriously known for lowering its own ambitions after never-ending failures, and hence the epistemological abyss is spiraling down. In the last 100 years of the anti-realist movement, it became fashionable for naturalism to concede that natural science is not so much knowledge about nature or language referring to reality in itself, since according to naturalism, naturalism, there is no such thing as object independent of subject or inequality independent of equality, known within naturalism as reality in itself. Consequently, the anti-realists started to claim that natural science is just text, as opposed to language about reality in itself. That is text from the vantage point of naturalism and within naturalism. If natural science is just text, then by implication, so is naturalism just text. Yet